There are just a couple of days left of the climate talks in Glasgow, and there's a real sense of urgency now. The first draft or cover decision setting out the potential outcome of COP26 was published by the UK in the wee small hours this morning. The document focused on adaptation and finance, saying the next decade will be critical to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The draft text also calls for countries to accelerate the phasing out of coal, the first time a UN climate agreement has specifically targeted fossil fuels. I asked David Warrilow from the Royal Meteorological Society how he thought the talks were going and whether Article 6 will prove a sticking point.
I would say that Glasgow has got a real vibe about it. There's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest. There have been some notable political commitments on methane, coal and forests. But of course, in terms of negotiations, it's unclear how far things are progressing because countries keep their cards close to their chest at this stage. So Article 6 is about the means of implementation, and one of the important areas is using market mechanisms. Now, market mechanisms mean that you can buy and trade emission reductions. It's a complicated subject because it's about implementing how parties can implement emission reductions under the Paris Agreement by buying and selling emission credits, basically. Economists think this is the most efficient way to reduce emissions at the cheapest cost. But of course there are all sorts of pitfalls such as double accounting, which has to be dealt with, and people playing games with it. So there's a lot of suspicion on the use of market mechanisms. There's also questions about how you bring in the market mechanisms that were formed under the Kyoto Protocol and make them consistent with Paris as well. So there are lots of very technical and detailed, almost legalistic language that needs to be agreed here. The key thing is making Paris happen and actually implementing it and delivering what was promised at Paris.
The roads into COP this morning were lined with cyclists ringing their bike bells, marking today's theme of transport. I met Alyssa Gilbert, Director of Policy and Translation at the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment, to find out more about driving the global transition to zero-emission vehicles.
One of the key areas where we get emissions of greenhouse gases from is from the transport sector and from the energy that we use for that. So there's quite a big drive towards electric vehicles. We actually need to, at the beginning, try and reduce the amount that we use energy in transport. And so to do that, that's the kind of first level thing you could do, is to choose more active forms of transport. Investments in public transport are actually an important complement to electrification of the private vehicles sector. If you think about the transport system, as well as private vehicles, we have delivery vehicles. We've seen an uptick in the need for those recently, and then slightly bigger heavy goods vehicles. And as you make your vehicles bigger, the trade-off in terms of electrification becomes less beneficial. We're looking also at rail, and for those of us who are in Glasgow, if you're travelling at all on the trains, and they've given us all a nice free rail pass while we're here in Scotland. And they've got lots of signs up talking about the electrification of the Scottish Railway. That's really important, but also getting people to use that rail more. And that's important for freight as well. And then, of course, there's the sticking bug of aviation. That's one of the things that people talk about a lot. You may have heard that one of the ways that we can reduce our individual footprints, of course, is to fly less. It's because it's very energy intensive, but also there's very few ways that you can actually clean up that sort of area of greenhouse gas emissions at the moment. So that's one of the things where we're going to need future technology and changes to lower the carbon.
Earlier this week, the Met Office announced some groundbreaking research. Andy Wiltshire from the Hadley Centre brought me up to date on Amazon Face, one of the largest open-air laboratories in the world.
This experiment is taking a pristine piece of rainforest, and then we're going to increase the atmospheric CO2, and we're going to measure then where that carbon is going, if that's being taken up by the trees or if it's being lost. And this is really, really crucial, I think, to grasping what's going to happen in the future. So the analogy we're using for this is a time machine. This is taking us to the 2050s, and we can see how the forest will respond. And what we're really keen to see is how much of that carbon is being taken up, and that is really keen to understanding how much carbon we can actually emit to stay within the 1.5 temperature target.
Did you know that COP26 is being powered by 100% renewable energy, and that the exact origin of the summit's power supply can be traced back to a specific wind farm in Perthshire? The renewable energy market in the UK is growing, so I grabbed Eddie Rich from the International Hydropower Association to get his take.
In the UK, hydropower is a very small part of the system. It's difficult to give a percentage because it fluctuates depending on the sort of need for backup. And of course, as we rely more on wind and less on coal and gas, then the percentage will go up. The countries that are going to do well are the ones who plan for longer term. And something about which is difficult about hydropower is that it takes a long time to build, and it's high capital costs up front, a long time for return.
As the clock ticks down, some of the key players are still holding their cards close to their chests, so it's going to be a nail-biting finish on Friday.